Thank you very much, and thanks a lot, Michael, for that inspired talk. My name is Lebogang Ramafoko, and currently I run an organization called Soul City. We were started just before democracy in South Africa, and we use media and communication for social change. So what I'm going to talk about is a project that we did to deal with violence against women in South Africa, using media, but also doing training and working with various stakeholders in South Africa about domestic violence. Is there a problem with translation? Oh, okay. Oh, it's low, okay. All right, can I go on? Okay, good. So, when we started this campaign in South Africa in 1998, these were some of the beliefs or the social norms about violence against women in South Africa. Firstly, many South Africans believed that violence against women or domestic violence was a private matter between husband and wife. They also believed that if a woman is beaten up, they must have done something to deserve it. No man just beats a woman. So if you were either cheeky, or you did not cook right, or you disrespected the man, or there must have been something that you did. If you said a man had raped you, you must have been wearing something that you shouldn't be wearing, or you must have been at a place where you shouldn't have been as a woman. But the entire responsibility and the blame of violence against women was put on the woman. There must be something wrong that you have done as a woman. Criminal procedures were also inaccessible to many women. So even if a woman is raped or they have been abused and they needed to report the case, the statistics of the women who actually go and report the case are probably 1/3 of the actual cases that happen. So if you are a woman and you get raped, when you get to a police station, you are in public. A lot of the times the police officer who attends to you wants to know what happened to you in public. And they want to ask you very graphic details of what happened. And sometimes even their own body language, as you explain what happened, could actually indicate whether they, as police officers, and they are the first people you meet after a rape, for an example, believe what you are saying or not. So if you are young, you are 18 or 19, if you had been in a shebeen is a drinking place, if you had been drinking, if you admit that you had had sex before, each and every one of these statements that you make as you give your report, the face of the police officer, the way it drops and drops, and you know that by the time they say to you, okay, so what do you say happened? By the time they ask you that question, you know that even that person who took a pledge to serve and protect does not believe that a 17-year-old, 19-year-old single woman who was wearing a miniskirt, who was previously sexually active, could have been raped by probably somebody that they know in their neighborhood. And yet all the research points out that most rapes and most perpetrators of rape are by those people that women know. But the response that the people who report is basically opposite. You must be 90, you must have covered from top to toe, you must have led a very straight life, and you must be very unattractive, you must have been sober, you must have been in your own house, preferably under a bed, to be raped. Then they believe that you were raped. But these attitudes are not only attitudes that are displayed by police officers. Many women, even before they get to the police officers, have their own friends amongst them, not believe that if they are not 90 unattractive, have covered from top to toe, and were sitting under the bed, that they were raped. It simply does not happen. So what happened within that social norm is that the Domestic Violence Act was passed in 1998, but it was not implemented. What this means is that the act said that domestic violence was a crime, women could report it, they could get a protection order, they could be removed from the harmful home, and then, the law could take care of its course. And the definition included things like rape, included any physical violence, but it also included financial abuse and emotional abuse. But what is the good of a law or a policy if the public does not know about it? But more important, all the law enforcers who were meant to enforce that act had not been trained. And like in many instances, the law had been passed, but there were no budgets that were put towards training and supporting the people who were able to enforce a law. Now in South Africa, we've got one of the best constitutions in the world. It supports termination of pregnancy, same-sex marriages, and a whole lot of rights. And you can understand why in South Africa. Until 22 years ago, 22 years ago, we were very oppressive. So the people who drafted the constitution wanted the history of South Africa not to visit us anymore, so that there is no discrimination of any form, including no form of violence. However, if you do not put money to the laws that you put in place, they are as good as not existing. The paper that they are written on is not, the laws are not worth the paper that they are written on. So that is what happened. But it also happened within the social, cultural, and religious beliefs that were very entrenched. So when we did work at Soulsit about domestic violence, 80% of South Africans are Christian. And you spoke to men about domestic violence, and some of their responses were, well, Eve was created from a woman's rib, from a man's rib. So I was given dominion over the woman. What do you mean when you say that I can abuse a woman? Of course, when she does not listen to me, I can discipline her. It's part of discipline. But you cannot say that I have abused a woman. There's also cultural beliefs in many cultures. One of them that I will translate means that a woman's grave is their in-laws. And I find this one very paradoxical, because for some women it literally means that you will get married and die. But what it means is that there is sanction in society if you were to leave your marriage. So a woman does not leave a marriage. Another one says a home is made by a woman. So women who want to leave are basically scorned at. So the women themselves feel like, I have failed if I am to leave my relationship, regardless of how they have been treated in it. So you have a law that is very progressive, that wants to protect women in a context where the beliefs are entrenched, that says, I can discipline a woman. Cultural beliefs that says a woman must persevere. It's your cross to bear as a woman for marriage and relationships and love to be hard. We also passed a law after a country where the government had been so violent as apartheid. Every conflict was sorted out in a very violent manner. Black men in particular had to be violent to express their views and to be seen as men. They would be chiefs where they lived, but they would go and do a garden in a white man's house and be called a boy. So you pass this law within a context, and you don't have the budget to then empower and train the people who must enforce those laws. But you also do not challenge the social norms that have created these men. As Michael said, we are all microcosms of the society. So even the men who don't believe, even if they are police officers, who don't believe that a 17-year-old who was drinking, who had had sex before, could really be raped, are also a product of this society. So in a lot of ways, the law was years ahead of the people who it was meant to serve, but also the people who was meant to enforce, who were meant to enforce that law. So what did we do? Right now I'm the executive director at Soul City, but for many years I was the executive producer of the television soap operas that Soul City had produced. So we created a soap opera. Media is very powerful in shaping social norms in our society. China can make a lunchbox that is pink or red or blue, and then somebody in Hollywood does a movie called Finding Nemo, and anybody else here who knows that who are parents, you know that if that little plastic container made in China can have that Finding Nemo picture on it, that's it, you are done. Every child must have the Finding Nemo lunchbox. So similarly, we created media and popular stories that could shift people's opinions. When our dramas are on air in South Africa, they are the third most watched soap operas in the country, and they are watched by at least 7 million people on any one night. The power of the media is that it helped us to put the issue on the public agenda. We told a story of a teacher, Mr. Nice Guy. He comes into this fictional village or township called Soul City. That's the name of the soap opera and the name of the place on the soap opera and the name of the organization. We just thought we must keep one name. And meets Matlakala, who was the receptionist at the clinic in Soap City. They get married. He comes with 2 kids. He got divorced from this very terrible wife. And the first few months, the first few episodes, he is the woman that every man wants to have. Until she comes home late one day and the tables turn. And the advice she gets from her mom is that, well, there is no marriage without problems. The excuse she starts giving her friends is that, in fact, he does not beat me. He doesn't want to beat me up. He just says sometimes he gets stressed at work. You know, when he's stressed and things happen and he just finds himself lashing out. Until the 10th episode, 13 episodes, when he sees at the clinic another woman being brought into the clinic almost dead because of what the boyfriend had done. And he hears his own story from this woman who comes into the clinic. That story created a lot of debate and a lot of dialogue in communities around domestic violence. But we also understood that you can have debate, you can have people talking about a story, but that cannot be the end of what we wanted to do. So as part of creating this campaign, we also raised funding to support the National Network on Violence Against Women, which was a group of NGOs based in communities that were helping women that were going through violence against women. We also launched a domestic violence helpline in 1998, and I'm proud to say that to date that helpline is still going strong. In fact, I remember one day I went home, we had launched the story, and we, in fact, in one of the episodes where Matlakala, the character, is in the hospital, the doctor who sees her, and she tells the doctor she fell or the dog jumped up and bit her on the face or something. She's making the excuses, and that doctor gives her the number. One day I was at home and my 2 sisters were arguing amongst each other that they would do, who will do the dishes. And my, the middle sister, so the 3 of us said to my younger sister, once I'm done with you, you'll be calling 150, 150. And I sort of turned around and I'm like, what is 150, 150? But the domestic violence number had become such a part of the storyline and such a dialogue piece that in fact, even in my home, people were using it in a conversation. So media really helped us to popularize the service. But what was important was that this is not a problem that communities and societies could solve on their own. So we also fundraised for money to train the police, but not only on domestic violence. What was very important was that we trained police on gender. We trained police on understanding issues of masculinity and understanding issues of femininity. And it was very interesting that when we trained magistrates and police, we trained them about their own beliefs and values about gender and then about domestic violence. Because we found that when people's own beliefs were shifted or were challenged, they were better able to actually implement the act. So what did we see in our intervention? For the period that we were on air, which was just over 3 months, there was increased dialogue about the issue. When we did the literature in South Africa, we found that in some countries in South America actually, when communities would hear somebody abuse their partner in the house, they would go out and they would bang pots. It had never happened in South Africa and it had never happened in the media. So in our storyline, in our fictional story, we had about episode 10 or 11, the characters around the home of the abuser's home going out and banging the pots. A few months later, newspaper journalists showed us images of in a community where women were marching and basically banging pots outside an abuser's home. In India, that example was used in a different manner by a sister organization of ours called Breakthrough, and it's called Bell Bajao, which means ring the bell, where in fact if you hear there is noise and somebody screaming at the house, you go and you ring the bell. So media is very powerful in role modeling what communities can do to challenge domestic violence. But what did we learn? We learned that this is long-term work. It does not have a start and an end date. We also learned that this work needs many partners. But more importantly, domestic violence is a symptom of many other problems, but it's also a symptom of our concept of femininity and masculinity, and I think Michael spoke a lot about that. It's also a symptom of our parenting. A lot of the perpetrators, and somebody has done a study, that are in jail for some of the worst forms of violence against women and children, speak to how they were parented before. So there is a direct correlation between how we parent and domestic violence. But it's also a symptom of our politics and what we value. I often say, talk is cheap. If you want to see what politicians care about, look at where they spend most of their money. If they tell you they care about domestic violence, ask them to give you their budget for the military and the army, and ask them to give you the budget for domestic violence. Then you will know exactly what they value. When I say that this is long-term work, I am reminded by what happened to us. So we did this campaign in 1998. But 10 years ago, our current president was accused of rape. And I think what was on trial was not only a man who had 5 wives or 4, I don't know, but many, who had raped a young woman who considered him an uncle. What went on trial was our laws and our beliefs, both as men and as women. Because during that trial, thousands of people stood at the court supporting the current president and really victimizing the woman who had reported. And I must say, the way that we behaved as a country during that rape trial, we did not come out well at all as a country. The other thing that has happened is that funding to feminist organizations has dropped while the problem has escalated. Many small organizations that are at community level, that are able to respond when a woman or a child or a family are in need, are simply not able to do their work. And this is not work that can be done by the police alone. This is not work that the laws will fix. Even if you arrested all perpetrators today in Brazil of violence against women, you will not solve the problem unless you deal with some of the social, cultural, and religious beliefs that I spoke about. So, education must continue. I think we must challenge ourselves in whatever place that we are in, whether in the workplace, in our communities, in our home, but partnerships are key. This is not something that is going to be done by one sector of society. And as law enforcers, our services must be friendly. We need to put ourselves in the shoes of the women and children who get abused and really make sure that our services are friendly. And it will differ from place to place, and it will differ from client to client. And lastly, every woman can be raped. Doesn't take any special woman to be raped. Thank you very much.